Hello everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to be here. Welcome to the Brushstrokes Mastery Masterclass. I first and foremost want to just thank Demi for inviting me onto her channel to deliver this masterclass. My name is Lauren Saunders, just in case you don't know who I am the artist behind the Love and Dots brand on Instagram or handle on Instagram. And I'm a full-time Mandala artist. And Demi invited me to come and teach this masterclass. She wanted me to do some demonstrations for you guys with her brushes, which I love. And I wanted to turn it into, with her help, just a bit of like a mini class for you guys. Both Demi and I have full-length courses on the topic of brushstrokes, but I know it's something that can be really intimidating when you are sort of bridging into bringing brushstrokes into your practice, or maybe you've been at it for a while, but you still feel like it's something that causes more overwhelm and frustration than it does anything else. So I'll give a really quick introduction to myself. Like I said, I'm the artist behind Love and Dots. I'm sure many of you have been in my courses. I have a membership. But before being a full-time business owner, about 10 years ago, I was a high school art teacher. And so painting specifically is something that I've been doing for as long as I can remember. And when Demi came out with her first set of brushes, I was really excited. I was also apprehensive just because I have been trying out and sourcing different brushes for years. I used to do it for an entire art department, and I have a history in oil painting, and the brushes in oil painting specifically are so important. So I'm just very picky. And when she first asked me last year to review her first set, I actually was a little bit nervous just because I told her right out the gate, I'm going to be really honest with you in terms of whether or not I like these enough to use them in my practice. Because at the time I had a couple sets that were really working for me, and it was hard for me to imagine a set that I would like more. But I'm very happy to say that these days I almost exclusively use Demi's brushes, and I don't have like an affiliate code or anything. I don't make money when people buy these brushes through me. I just like to share with people what I personally use and love, and that is Demi's sets. And I'm going to talk about why today, and we're going to go through some brushstroke fundamentals for you, whether or not you are brand new to brushstrokes and just not really sure where to start, or maybe you've been working on it for a while, but it still feels just unfamiliar to you and you're not really sure what you might be doing wrong or what you should focus on in terms of improving on your brushstrokes. We're going to go through a lot of that today, and I'm going to talk about what to look for in brushes that are going to make it a lot easier to get that perfect, beautiful stroke. So I've created a free workbook for you guys, and you can go into the description. Demi will link it for you there so that you can download it. It is 3 pages long, and this is just going to help you to actually apply what I'm talking about today so that you really can get a feel for these topics, because I can teach it to you all day long, or you can watch other people do brushstrokes all day long. The reality is that the way we get really good at brushstrokes is through committing to the practice and the repetition of brushstrokes and different movements within different strokes over and over and over again until it becomes something that you feel, something that your brain and body just know. It really is a muscle memory thing, but unless you know what you should be doing in terms of like really breaking down each and every stroke, how it feels in your hand, where you should be moving, how you should be moving, how you're going to actually anchor your hand down, then it can be really hard to commit it to muscle memory properly, right? So we're going to be building that foundation today, and I'm really excited to be with you here. So I'm going to be obviously talking about Demi's brushes and why I genuinely love them. I know that we both have brushstrokes courses, and I'll have Demi link mine below and probably hers as well. I have a course called Beautiful Brushstrokes, and it dives into a lot of what we're talking about today, plus much more on a really deep and thorough level. So before we talk about the difference in these two sets, I want to talk about what to look for in a brush that is really going to lend itself to the art of brushstrokes, specifically brushstrokes for mandala painting, because I had been painting for a long time before I started painting mandalas, and I was really surprised at how different of a process and a feel brushstrokes for mandalas are in comparison to just regular painting. And that's where I think it's really important for us to break this down step by step. So what you're looking for now, Demi has two beautiful sets. And actually when she sent me this set, I think the only piece of feedback I gave her in terms of something I would love to see was I told her I would love it if you came out with a short set. And that's because I use my short brushes probably more than I use my liner brushes for reasons that we're going to talk about today, but they really can be the key to really beautiful, crisp strokes when you're using them for the strokes that they are meant for. So she obviously has this long set of liners. It has a couple like the 2/0 and the 3/0, really nice and thin ones. Generally, I use my 3/0 for like really thin top strokes. And then I use the thicker one. So we have 0 through 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. I use the thicker ones for longer strokes, just depending on how thick those strokes are that I'm going to be painting. Then let me actually just take these out of the wrappers. So then we have the short bristled set, and there are 4 in this set. We have 5/0, 2/0, 0, and 1. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about what I use these for because my most used brush out of all of them is this one here. So it's sort of like a medium length bristle in the size 1, and it's the same thickness as this one here, except this one's obviously much longer. So what we're looking for before we even get into different lengths, because that's obviously a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and the reason that I had hoped that Demi would come out with a shorter bristle brush is because of the control that it offers. But before we even get into that, one thing that you want to look for, and probably the reason that I love Demi's brushes more than any other, is she really nailed it with the bristle flexibility. And this to me is the number one thing that we need to pay attention to when it comes to sourcing brushes that are going to make brushwork within our mandala practice a lot easier. So one thing that I always recommend is that people buy synthetic brushes. There are a lot of brushes you can buy out there that are animal fibers or animal hairs. And generally those are brushes that you see used in watercolor because they hold a lot of water, but they're very flexible and it's like they don't have any of their own spring to them. I mean, obviously you could find watercolor sets out there that do have some spring, but the more expensive ones, they're really sensitive to any amount of pressure that you put down on your page. And then there's ones that are too stiff. And to give you an example, so these were the 2 sets that I was using. I was actually using this set, the US Art Supply set, before Demi's brushes came out. And I still like this set, but it is a lot more flexible. It has a lot less spring to it in comparison to Demi's. And it's in my course, I actually do a demonstration of this, of how you can tell how springy one is versus the other. And this set, I actually find it's lacking a little bit of stiffness. Now, another set that's quite popular and that I used in the beginning and that I didn't really like very much, to be honest, is the XDT set. And this set it has more spring to it. So these are stiffer. So if I was to put these in order in terms of most flexible to least, it would be the most flexible bristles are the US Art Supply set, then we have Demi's set, and then we have the XDT set. And to me, Demi's are really ideal in terms of how much flexibility you have and how much stiffness you have. It's right in the middle. And the reason that you want a nice balance of the two is because with a really flexible brush, what you're going to get is bristles that respond beautifully to the pressure and the movement that you apply. But you want that spring, you want a bit of that stiffness so that the bristles don't get away from you. So you have ideal control with a set that is right in the middle, just very well balanced in terms of how soft versus how stiff the bristles are. So with this set, what I find is that when you are painting with them, it can be really hard to get a really nice curve in your strokes. And obviously, you know, all of these sets can work. It's just which one lends itself to easiest brush strokes, because as you get more evolved in your practice and you get more comfortable with brush strokes, it is a lot easier. Like, it becomes, I could probably do any kind of brush stroke that I wanted with this because I've been doing this for a long time. But in the beginning, this actually felt really limiting to me. And as soon as I tried a more flexible set, I couldn't believe the difference it made with my curved strokes. And then when demis came along, I just felt like they had the perfect balance. And so what this allows for you to do when you have a set that is really, it's the perfect amount of flexibility, that's the only way I can think to say it, is that you get this perfect, it gives you control. It gives you the ideal amount of control. So I can really manipulate these bristles to go wherever I want to based on the amount of pressure I'm applying and the movement that I'm making with my hand. So that's what we want to know about flexibility. We want one that is just an ideal amount, not too stiff, not too soft. When the bristles are too soft, our strokes have a tendency of, I don't really know how to describe it, but it just can really easily, it's like, here's what it is. It doesn't respond to our movement in the same way because they're really soft bristles. And so I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. It doesn't follow our hand movement, especially once these are wet and full of paint. It doesn't follow our hand movement. It's lazy. These bristles can be really lazy. Whereas these ones, the tips of the bristles in particular, I find they can sort of push out and away from me in a way that I don't want them to. So they're the opposite of lazy. They're almost like kind of taking charge and going where they want to go because they're not responding. These ones, it's like neither one is responding quite as much as I would like it to my own movements. This one less so. I do like these brushes. The biggest difference I actually find between Demi's set and the US Art, I'm not a fan of these ones personally, and the US Art Supply set is that hers has that little bit of extra stiffness that really goes a long way, but they also just clean way better. That was one of my biggest pieces of feedback I gave to her. I feel like these brushes last me 3 or 4 times as long, whereas these ones get pretty gunked up. So brush flexibility is the number one thing that I would suggest people look for, and a synthetic brush is way more likely to give you that right balance, and these are synthetic. Okay, so let's go into the differences in lengths and why this matters. So the number one thing you want to understand about having different lengths of bristles is that longer bristles are going to hold more paint and then can therefore travel further, whereas shorter bristles are going to hold less paint, which then allows you to get a sharper tail on your shorter stroke. So if I were to use, say, my number 1 in my longer liner set here, and I was trying to do sort of these like medium short ones here, there's going to be so much paint in this brush that by the time I get to the end of it, it's very hard to get a nice sharp tail. Whereas if I was using a shorter liner down here, I'm probably not going to have enough paint to get me to the end there. And the end is either going to be very wispy or non-existent. And so choosing shorter brushes for shorter strokes and longer brushes for longer strokes, to me, that's the key difference. And that's what makes a shorter set so appealing, because it's going to give you way more control on your shorter strokes. And for me personally, I do a lot of shorter strokes in my designs, and it is very common that within a single design of mine, I almost always use at least 2 different lengths, like one from each set, especially on some of my larger designs. And even on some of them, I'll actually use 3. So when Demi sent me her first version of this set, it had these 3 here, which will give you most of what you need for your shortest strokes. But I actually asked if she would consider adding an even shorter one, because I use this for strokes like these for the same reason. It holds a lot less. So we're actually going to do some demonstrating here, and you can follow along as we go. And you can, of course, pause if you need more time. But what I want you to pay attention to here is the difference it makes. And hopefully you have each of these sets, but if not, don't worry, like just practice with what you've got right now. But if you have shorter brushes and longer brushes, I encourage you to just feel them out here. So I'm going to use for my shortest stroke here, I'm going to use my shortest brush. So that's going to be my 0 brush in the white set. And we haven't gone yet into like pressure and paint and stuff like that. And we will, but I want to first go into just feeling out the difference between a short set and a long set and how much control this gives you to lift quickly and get that beautiful sharp tail, because I don't have too much paint in my brush that would prohibit me from being able to lift quickly and get that really nice short tail. Now, if you want, you can actually try this and feel it out on these same strokes with a longer brush just to feel the difference. So let's say I do my number 1 here. If I'm to saturate this brush, I just can't. That was my best attempt at trying to get a really nice sharp tail. The only way that I can do it with a longer brush is to use a very small amount of the brush. So instead of saturating all of the bristles like I just did, just using the very end. But the thing about this is that now I need to be extra careful in how I'm moving my hand, because the longer these bristles are, the more flexibility there is at the end. And so if I had to like do a nice curved stroke that was really short using this long brush, see, I don't know if you saw that, it like shot out from under me. And that's because these bristles, because they're longer, there's naturally more flexibility in them. And that makes it really hard. See how it does? I don't have control over it. I'm not good at that at all because I only use the shorter brushes for these shorter strokes. Now, I could potentially do it with my medium brush here, my number 1 brush, in the same way, using less paint. So as you can see, I don't have like the whole brush saturated. So I can do it there, but I'm gonna have potentially that same issue when I'm trying to do a shorter strokes. Now, I did have more control there because this is a much shorter brush. And so you could use this for really short strokes and it would work, but I prefer the 0 brush because there's that much more control with the shorter bristles. And it holds a lot less paint, so it's going to be a lot easier. Like I can just dip that whole brush in and still get that nice sharp tail. And if I want to do, actually, I did bring extra paper just for the sake of doing some other demonstrations. If I want to do a nice short curved stroke, I can do that really easily with this brush. But if I was to try and do it with this one, it's probably going to be impossible, to be honest. So a lot less paint. See how I just don't have the spring that I need. That's a mess. The spring that I need to have that kind of curve. Now I could probably do it with this, but again, I'm going to have the same issue, just a little bit less. So I still can't get that nice clean curve that I could get with the shortest brush here. Okay, so let's move on to our slightly longer one. So this brush I don't use a lot, but when I have a shorter stroke like this, usually it's in like the middle of a design, I will always use the shortest brush available. And even with this medium length one, I still couldn't get it nice and clean. This was just so easy. This was a total mess. And this, I could gain control over it with a lot of practice, but it would take a lot of practice. Okay, so The reason I use this brush the most and this length of brush the most is because to me, this is the ideal brush for any sort of medium length strokes. So in that case, I put a little bit too much paint on it. I kind of wanted to try out. And that's what prohibited me from having a nice sharp tail at the end. So that one was a little bit less paint, but I'm going to take even more off. And what we're looking for is that by the end of your stroke, there isn't a ton of extra paint left on your brush. And that's why as you lift, you get that nice sharp tail. Play around here with different amounts of paint. So in the beginning, I completely dipped it like this. And then when I tried to get that sharp, I kind of could do it there because I really laid a lot of that paint down, but it's kind of a messy stroke. Let's do it again with like a lot of extra paint. It's not a nice, first of all, it's a way wider stroke, but it's not a really nice sharp tail. Whereas if I dip this not quite up to the top of those bristles, I've got the ideal amount of paint to get that perfect sharp tail. And feeling this out and getting a sense of how much paint you need for different strokes is really key in being able to get consistent strokes, but also within your designs, being able to get like the perfect spacing between different strokes within the same design. It's all going to be about how much paint you're applying, which brush you're using, and how much pressure you're applying as well. Now for this one, I could use either. So I could use my liner brush. And if these were thinner, then that's where I would go down to a thinner one of the brushes. So I'm using my size 1 and the 0 in the shorter set, but also the size 1 in the liner because of how thick these are. And that to me is just what's going to work the best. But if I wanted these to be a lot thinner, then I would go down. I use my, not that one, 2/0 in the white set, quite a lot for shorter strokes that are also thinner. So this one here is a little bit thinner. We can try it on there. I have to apply more pressure to get the bristles to spread themselves out, but you can really get a nice sharp tail with this 2/0 because it's thinner. So thinner strokes, but also less paint on the brush. Sorry, what I meant there was thinner bristles, a thinner brush, and less paint on the brush itself. So you can play around here with different brushes and feel out which one feels easiest to you, paying attention to how much paint you're putting on the brush. Now, if I wanted to use my liner for these, I probably never would. To be honest, I would always use this brush for a stroke of this length. But I could use a liner for this. I just wouldn't want to saturate it because again, if I do that, so I've got the whole thing covered in paint. Now, I might be able to get, so I could get a sharp tail there, but I don't have the same control. Like I can feel, because these are long and therefore they have extra flexibility, I can feel how much I don't have the same amount of control, or they just don't want to stay as sturdy for me, which is ideal when you're doing a curved stroke, which I am not. One thing I also wanted to mention, because I get this question a lot, is paint consistency. And I often say that you're looking for paint that is roughly the consistency of like yogurt. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Deco Art Americana is pretty perfect right out of the bottle. If you're working with a thicker paint, you can use a medium like this one. I know you can't see it, but it's just called acrylic medium. Buy it in a finish that is the same as your paint. So all of Deco Art Americana's paints are matte. So I have a matte mixing medium, and this just helps to thin out the paint if you need it. I do use it in these paints when they've been sitting in the pots for a while and they're getting a little bit thick. Okay, so lastly, let's do our extra long ones here. Now, I'm gonna demonstrate this. If I was to use my zero brush, no way, I'm gonna run out of paint so quickly. I'm also gonna have to really push down to get enough, like I can't really get it thicker than that. So, I mean, that got me there, but I couldn't get the thickness. And if I was doing a curved stroke that was really long, it's likely going to be longer than this one. And I'll show you like how quickly I'm going to run out of paint. Like on the edge here, it wasn't filling out anymore because I was running out of paint. And this is like me really saturating this brush, but I'm also very limited as to how thick I can get it at the top. And so it's not that you can't do it, it's that there's extra struggle, and we don't need extra struggle. Let's let it be as easy as possible. Same thing, I could use my number 1 white brush for these strokes, but I'm gonna have to really douse it in paint, and I'm gonna have less control here when it comes to curved strokes. So let me just show you. I do use this sometimes for, I mean, like I said, this is my most used brush, so I do actually use it for some of my longer strokes. But I don't find it as easy for the really long ones. I really only use my liners, or like my long bristled liners, for the really long strokes. Personally, that's what feels good to me. This is a real personal thing. You need to decide what feels good to you, what works for you. Never done a stroke like that, but we're playing. To me, the one that makes this the easiest is my long bristle liner. And that's what we're looking for here, is bristles and brushes that make the stroke we are currently doing as easy as possible. So what you see me doing might not be, like maybe on these really long ones, you love using the white set of like the medium length. It's going to come down to how you grip your brush. It's going to come down to how much pressure you apply. It's going to come down to the way that you hold your brush and move your hand. So it's not that you necessarily need to be copying exactly what I'm doing here. I gave you these sheets to practice feeling out different brushes, different lengths, and just seeing what lends itself to you. With these ones, because there's more flexibility at the end of the longer brushes, I can really get a nice thick stroke by applying more paint and more pressure. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go. Okay, so let's talk about pressure and application, actually, which is what we were just talking about. So I want you to actually practice, because again, this is about feeling. I want you to practice the different strokes you can get with the same brush. And where this is going to come in is when we are doing a brushstroke design that has multiple brush strokes, like a floral design, for example, that has multiple brush strokes that are right next to each other. Knowing how much pressure and paint to apply based on how much space we have available is going to be really key in creating an ideal amount of space between different strokes. Let me try that again. Different strokes within the same design. So let's say I've got the outside of a floral design. It looks like that. And then on the next one, I want it to be right beside that one, but with a little space in between. I want to make sure that I'm coming out far enough from that brushstroke. Now you can see here, I've got a little bit of extra space between these two strokes. And so what I'm gonna do is apply more pressure to have those bristles. That one was a little bit messy. I'm gonna apply more pressure. I'll do that again. To have those bristles sort of like they spread themselves out the more pressure you apply. So if I want a thinner stroke, I'm not gonna apply that much pressure. If I want a thicker stroke, I'm gonna apply a lot more pressure, and look at how thick I can get that. In fact, I kind of wanna use my number 2 brush for this. The way that I get really like consistent spacing for the most part between different strokes within the same design is through being mindful of how much pressure I'm applying. So I have space there. I want to fill it. I'm going to apply more pressure, and I can get those bristles to go where I want them to. Paper is a little bit hard to demonstrate this on because it's not as slippery a surface as my pieces. So I kind of just need to adjust for the extra friction there. Now, if I have, let's say, I have a smaller space that I want to fill here. I'm going to use the same brush, number 2. I of course could go down to my number 1, and I want to fill that space, but I still want there to be a space in between all of the strokes. This is going to be a matter of not applying as much paint and as much pressure. So I could get that spacing there just by not pushing down. And this is something I provided you a worksheet for so that you can feel the control that you have based on 2 things: paint application on your actual brush and pressure applied. So on these ones, so use the same brush for these 2 rows here and these 2 rows here, just to show yourself the difference that the amount of paint you're applying and the amount of pressure you're using has. Now I'm going to use that same brush, but I'm going to apply way less paint. So you can see it's kind of just on the edge there. And I'm not really going to apply much pressure at all. I'm just going to kind of drag this along the surface. Now, I would more likely use a smaller brush and a shorter brush because that's going to, again, make it easier. And that's the goal here. It's not that like this brush doesn't work. It's that it's a little bit harder than if I was using, I would definitely use my 2/0 for this one for this stroke because I don't have to be as mindful about how much paint I'm applying, and it's going to be a lot easier to get that nice sharp tail. Although I had too much paint on it that time. It's funny how that one actually turned out not as good. I find there's a little bit of an adjustment period between brushes. Like my muscle memory kind of has to kick in for each one in terms of how much paint I'm applying and pressure. There we go. By the way, never sit your brushes in water and leave them for any period of time because it will bend your bristles. But I just want you to show yourself here that you can use one brush for a whole variety of strokes, and more importantly, a whole variety of shapes and widths within a single stroke. So we're kind of just talking about all the things that give you control today. So we've gone over different brushes in terms of lengths and thicknesses for different strokes. Now we're talking about different amounts of pressure and paint application. So I use the same brush for both of those, and I'm going to do it again on this one. Now we haven't really talked yet about curved strokes, and we're going to in a minute, so bear with me. Okay, so that wasn't quite thick enough. I need to apply a little bit more paint and a little bit more pressure to get those bristles to spread themselves out, but I could still get that nice sharp tail there. Now, I wouldn't personally use this liner for these strokes. I would, because it's a little bit of extra work and mindfulness in terms of using a longer bristle for a shorter stroke. So I would personally use my number 1 just because it's easier. I can do both. This one's easier, so that's what I'm going to choose. Now, if I want to just show myself how much I can do with this brush, just paying attention to how much. So I've applied a lot less paint there. Hang on, I'll clean this a bit. So there's paint, like, I mean, there actually is paint almost to the end there, which might be a little bit much. Let's see. Yeah, a little too much paint. So I'm just going to dip it a little bit less. And all you're doing here with your workbook is just getting a feel. How much pressure versus how much paint with which brushes. Now, after you've gotten that far, you might want to try using a different brush and see if it's easier. So let's go back to my 2/0. It's going to be a lot easier. Oh, so much easier with that one. I could do it with the thicker one, and I could even do it with the longer brush, but this one is going to give me so much more effortless control, and that's what we're looking for. It's still going to take a lot of practice though. Like if you're new to this, the brushes are really going to help you because they're going to give you more control. The right brush is going to give you more control. It doesn't mean that you don't have to practice this. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about hand movement. So let's just wash my brushes here. I'm using the color Tea Berry just because it's bright and pretty. We're going to talk about hand movement, and there's something specific here I want to bring into the discussion, and that is noticing when you are moving your wrist versus when you are moving your fingers. I had someone recently inside of my beautiful brushstrokes course, and right away she said, I didn't even realize I was only moving my wrist. It was never going into my fingers. Like the movement of the stroke was never extending past the limitations of her wrist, which would then make it a lot harder to do some of these, especially the longer ones that are more curved. So I really go into this in detail in my course, which, by the way, I'll have a little coupon code for you guys down below for the rest of June if you would like to buy it. And Demi might mention her Brushstrokes course as well. But basically, it's really about understanding and paying attention to. A lot of this is just bringing mindfulness to your brushstroke practice, paying attention to when you're moving your wrist versus when you're moving your fingers. And the way that I kind of see it, I maybe should have done this a little bit differently. Actually, no, that's okay. We'll start here. And I'm going to use my 2/0. Here it is. For these ones. And to me, how it feels, and it's going to depend if you're a lefty, if you hold your brush a little bit differently. So you don't necessarily have to try and copy what I'm doing here. You just need to pay attention to what feels good to you. To me, how it feels is the lower part of the curve, or of not even the curve, because this is also true for the straight strokes as well. The lower part of the curve, the part that's closer to me, that's going to be mostly a movement in the wrist, right? You can just feel that, just demonstrate that for yourself. And then as I am moving up towards the tip, especially if I'm curving it around, that's, for me anyways, more likely going to be my fingers, because I have that movement more easily in my fingers than I do in my wrist, right? And this is really it's gonna change based on what direction we're going. It especially changes on the longer strokes because I need to use my fingers to travel the distance, right? Let's do some demonstrations with this. So let's actually use this one. So especially on the strokes that are a lot longer, I'm gonna use so this is my wrist here. Still my wrist. I can feel the moment when it's easier for me to now put that movement into my fingers, right? Now, if I had tried to do that just with my wrist moving, I get stuck there unless I want to like be awkward. That's as far as I could go with my wrist. It probably is more doable with just my fingers, but I can't, it's hard because I can't move. It's like our wrist moves on like it's more of like a ball, what do you call it? Like it's got more of like a ball point in the way that it moves, whereas our fingers are more back and forth. And so different parts of the stroke, I need that movement in my wrist, and then other parts, I need that movement in my fingers. So especially like back and forth strokes, to me, that's just so much easier with my fingers doing most of the work. Up and down, especially in the beginning, is going, for me anyways, to be more of my wrist. And then I'm going to transfer it into my fingers. I go into this in my course, and I really talk a lot also about like how to best anchor and, you know, what you're using your elbow versus your forearm for, things like that. I'm not going to go into that today because it would get really long, but all I want you to do here is, this is again something that's going to be granting you more control and bringing mindfulness into these movements is what is really key, because it's through understanding what goes into the perfect brushstroke that then has us practice it over and over and over again in the correct way so that we commit that movement to muscle memory, and then it becomes very sort of automatic. But if we're just like what a lot of people do in the beginning, what I certainly did was I had no idea of any of this. So I was just, to me, it was like just brushstroke. That's it. One thought, one movement, brushstroke. Now it's like, how am I laying it down? What angle am I on? That's another thing we talk about in my course. What angle are we on? Which part of my hand am I using? How much pressure am I applying? I didn't know to think about any of these things when I was getting started, and I really had to figure it out for myself. And so I just want you to bring thought and awareness and intention to every part. That's actually not the brush I wanted to use. To every part of the stroke. And then it's through practice and repetition of doing it correctly that it's going to become automatic for you. So this one to me is almost exclusively, I'm kind of lifting at the wrist, but I'm using a lot more fingers personally. In terms of the movement anyways, the lifting part is at the wrist for me. And practice each of these without, like, what if you try to do it with just your wrist? How does that feel? Or try to do it with just your fingers. How does that feel? Now bring them back together. Right? Let's try doing it now. This one is a little bit different because it's a different movement. And to me, this one is a lot more fingers. Especially that like hooking motion. I can't really bring my wrist down like that. See, I tried there and messed it up. In the same way that I can with my fingers. Socket is the word that I was looking for with my wrist. So you have like, it's more of like a round movement, but you don't have as much back and forth. And like, you definitely don't have as much, almost no up and down movement with your wrist if you are doing what I do, which is actually rest on your wrist. So pretty much all up and down, like this direction needs to be from my fingers because I can't move my wrist while keeping my foundation steady there. So I rely on my fingers. Let's do that again, but with a longer brush, which in my mind or opinion, this is easier to kind of feel the difference in with a longer stroke. Let's do, yeah, I've got my number 1 brush. Too much paint is like dripping off there. So lots of fingers. But now I can see how my wrist wants to bring that around. It's kind of like where the limitations of your wrist start is where the abilities of your fingers begin. Or sorry, let me say it again. Where the limitations, no, that did make sense. The limitations of your wrist begin, so too does the possibilities of your fingers. Or where the abilities of my wrist ends, the abilities of my fingers begin, in a sense, and vice versa. Let's do some down here. You can practice making these go further if you want to really feel that like finger flick at the end. You might want to practice, what is it like to make these more curved? Okay, so there are more topics that are worth talking about and learning when it comes to brush strokes. This is a short masterclass, so we've kind of touched on some of the big ones. I highly recommend Demi's sets. I'm saying that because they are the ones that I use and love. And the reason is that they really lend themselves to just having ultimate control. If you want to keep practicing, what I would do is take a blank sheet of paper and go through each of these brushes, see what it can do. I don't use my number 3 very often. I have used it because it really lends itself to a very thick stroke, which I don't do a whole lot of, but feel it out. Just see what it can do, right? Let's go over here. Right? It holds more paint. It has more bristles. And so when I apply pressure, they're going to spread themselves. I can get a thicker stroke. I could also use this though for thinner strokes. It just wouldn't be as easy as using a thinner brush. But I have that much control within just a single brush. And then add a whole bunch of more sizes and you have, times 10. So I hope that was helpful. I'm sure that Demi will link all of her 2 different brush strokes down below. She also has a dotting set that I use exclusively, as you can tell, because they're all numbered and color coded, which I absolutely love. Just makes things really easy, especially for teaching. And yeah, it was really fun to be here with you guys. Come over, say hi on Instagram. And yeah, I'll have a discount for you for my Beautiful Brushstrokes course until the end of June. And let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. I'll try to pop back into the video. And I was watching live actually as it premiered so that I could be answering people's questions in the comments and stuff like that. But you can also find me over on my Instagram. And yeah, I just really want to also send my appreciation to Demi for creating these beautiful sets that so many people in the community use and love. I'm super grateful for them. I really do find that they last really long, which I love because I was previously replacing my brushes pretty often. And now with the 2 sets, I just feel like there's not a single stroke I don't have the perfect brush for personally. And it just really offers as much control as possible. And then implementing these other things that we've talked about, that's also going to really lend itself to giving you control within your brushstroke practice. And this is really fun. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.